Hi, I'm Bill Donehey, a Mohegan Tribal member here at the Wadsworth Athenaeum. A little background about myself. When I was in the military during the Vietnam War, there was a lot of downtime. And I started carving walking staffs for a lot of the members of my platoon that I was in. And then for years, after I came back to the United States, I traveled around and lived in California, lived in Seattle, Washington, and I got to meet different tribes and the styles of art. Well, 30 years later, I came back to Connecticut back in 2001 to help with the family business, and had an accident where I went down a flight of stairs, basically broke my entire body, and died in the ambulance. Well, I didn't see a big light, but when I woke in the hospital, it was a long rehab. And I thought back about to the carving and some of the stuff I had seen and began working with more walking staffs. Well, walking staffs, that led to creating cedar prayer boxes where we keep our eagle feathers and other ceremonial items. And I made those and gave those away to other friends and tribal members that practice ceremony. And as I got around New England, I began to see, like with the Wampanoag tribe, they're wampum makers. And I just got curious about it and the level of skill that it took. And after many, many years of working with wampum, I ended up creating this one. This is one that I'd seen a crop circle when I was in the military and was really intrigued by it because it was so perfect. It was in the fall time in one of the hay fields. And then as the years went by, I saw more and more, but I always remembered that crop circle that was similar to that. And just trying to figure out, where it came from, what it meant. And as I discovered more of that in our own tribe, there were several other wampum makers. And we usually get the inspiration first through nature. And then we try to reflect that in what we do. And that's where I'm at today. Well, the materials I use, the wampum, which is actually quahog shells, and they're prized for the deeper the purple, the more valuable they are. I mean, they were used as wampum back in the 16th, 17th centuries. In fact, the Hiawatha's belt is wampum. And that's where, it's kind of like the cradle of democracy where Ben Franklin got his idea of the 5 tribes coming together. So a lot of our expression isn't in written form, it's through art. And, before there was language, there was art. So symbolism is very important in what we're trying to tell people. And back in the day, the prominent people in the tribe would wear a lot of wampum. It was a sign of wealth and prestige. It was also used as currency. Wampum lovers, they see that dark purple and you just light up. These shells came from down the Bluff Point Groton area. My mother was born in Pequannock Bridge, my Mohegan mother. And I hunted down the shells and brought them home and cleaned them up, sanitized them to kill any of the bacteria, let them sit, saw the image in my head that I was supposed to create, and started cutting them to what I needed. I've made a lot of necklaces, and each one of them is something I saw in my head. And why I saw it is just like, okay, let me see if I can actually bring that into being. And I also work with turquoise and bone and feathers. I also have made many prayer fans. Actually, one of my prayer fans is in the Washington, D.C. in the Department of Commerce. One of my prayer fans that I had made for basically prayer and dance ceremonies. One of the things we had done, we have several wampum makers, was to actually use the old methods in trying to make one of the small beads. And it's probably one of the most frustrating experiences of my life. So now I can see where a lot of the value came in back then, because it takes a lot of time and effort. They didn't have power tools. They were basically using what the other shells and other things that they traded for with the British and the Dutch, and being able to drill that hole for the bead takes hours and hours and hours. A lot of the harvesting of the quahogs, I mean, we use quahogs here in clam chowder, clam fritters. Rhode Island has some of the biggest harvest companies, but clams are pretty resilient. They can grow, and quahog shells can grow 7-8 inches around if you let them. So they're pretty happy little clams. This is probably one shell. This is another shell, because I take the best part of the meat. I'll use other parts of the shell to make what look like claws from the outer edges of it. I actually have a Facebook page called Native Expression CT, which shows a number of the works that I do. I don't sell online, but it's more to exhibit, and if I'm doing a powwow nearby, you know, some of the stuff will be available there. How it was used, why it was used. I look at my own family, and my family goes back almost 500 years in this area. So a long time before the other people came. And it's just always been a part of our culture and our history that, you know, there are people that have different talents, and mine is finding the beauty in a clamshell. My family lived in this area until about the Depression. My grandfather, who's English, actually his family came over on the Mayflower. His name is Wilbur White. He's part of the William and Susanna White that came over. So, and my mother's family was waiting for them. So in the 20s, he worked as an engineer for New Haven Railroad for over 50 years. And during the Depression, they closed the yards in Connecticut, and we moved up to Boston. So I grew up basically in the South Boston area through the 60s, and you know, just disconnected from the culture. We were pretty much decimated. But thank God that the Mohegans had the Mohegan Church established back in 1830 in this area, so they didn't have to do the Trail of Tears. They didn't have to be relocated. So most of the artifacts stayed at the Tantaquidgeon Museum, which is the oldest Native American owned and operated museum in the country. And that's there in Uncasville. And you can see a lot more of the history of the tribe and how they interacted with other tribes around the country. When I left Germany in the early 70s, I left and came back to Boston. The only possession I had was a stereo system I bought overseas. So I traded that for a 1969 Chevy van, and threw my 2 boxes of stuff in it and left. Well, what preceded that was, I got home in January, and unemployment check was $85 a week. And one morning I got up really early to go down and get my unemployment check, and in my, you know, beat up hoopty res van, and it had snowed the night before, and it was up over almost to the top of the tires. So I was out there 4:30 in the morning shoveling the van out, and took a couple hours. I get in the van. Mind you, I lived in downtown Boston, kind of Jamaica Plain area, and the plow truck came by. Plowed me right back in. It was up to my windows. And I said, you know what? I need to go where the sunshine is. So I drove from Boston by myself back in 1976 and ended up in Huntington Beach, California. And I think about it now, you know, I think, wait a minute, there was no internet, there were no smartphones, it was just me and a CB radio and you know, $50 in my pocket. And I landed in California and saw the beaches, and I just fell in love. Got a job in a restaurant, so I know where my next meal was coming from. and stayed in the restaurant industry for over 40 years. So coming back to Connecticut was part of the Phase 2 Mohegan Sun opening. They were going to open up the big rock mountain. They called it Leffingwell's at that time. It was called Wambi Rock, and Wambi in Mohegan means white, so the big white rock, and I was running that nightclub. And that's the reason I came back to Connecticut. And then I had my accident, went down a flight of stairs and had to rewrite it and became a training specialist. What I do now is I've created and facilitate the largest disability inclusion program in the country at Mohegan Sun. I work with 11 school transitional academies. I work with Project Search, which chose us as a host site, and Viability. And we have right now about 40 to 50 persons with disabilities learning how to be a part of a productive team, how to take direction, how to stay on task. And it's probably the most worthwhile thing I've ever done. And I've been doing that for 10 years at Mohegan Sun.